So yeah, let's get rolling. So, hey, thanks for coming tonight. This is actually a kickoff night for us at Aftercamp, and this is the Aftercamp Meetup. So a couple things about what is going on in Rachel and I's world. So I know a lot of you are connected to us, so I thought that maybe we just give kind of like a global update of what the heck Aftercamp actually is, and kind of what our goals are, and just put it all out there and really talk about this meetup series and what we're hoping to get out of it. And so, yeah, let's just dive right in, I guess. First and foremost, if you guys like chatting is a good way. I put on the dorky ass headphones because I want to hear myself, mostly because I want to make sure I'm not doing this where I breathe into the mic. And I'm like, I hate that. I hate when people do that. So I'm wearing the dorky headphones, so I make sure that I don't breathe crazy in the mic. So you're welcome. So yeah, we are stoked to get this kicked off. So a lot of you know that we started Aftercamp late last year, and we looked at a lot of different things that we wanted to do. And so Rachel and I sat down and kind of just decide, like, why do we exist? Like, what's the point of Aftercamp? What's the point? Like, what do we want to do, and who do we want to be when we grow up? Which is a funny thing considering we're pushing 40. And largely what we decided is a couple things. The first thing was we decided that we want to help bridge the gap between really graduation from programs and that first placement. That was like something we are obsessed about, and we like obsessively look at other people's content, what people are doing well, and we try to roll it into feedback that we give. The second reason we exist is because once you get that job, one of the things that we know we have good data on is that experience looks very different for a lot of, depending on where you go. So like if you get a job at company A and your friend gets a job at company B, you are both going to grow in very different directions. And so our hypothesis is, or the thing that we think we understand, is that we believe that we can help really dictate the first couple of years of somebody's career trajectory. So that was the second reason we exist. The third reason we exist is because we want to help showcase what you can do to people who are non-technical. And so what I mean by that is, like, I think that LinkedIn does a good job where you get to like talk about your career professionally, and like, you know, you get to list all your different skills, you get to like list kind of resume style what your capabilities are, but it doesn't actually show how great you are. And so that was the reason why we formed Aftercamp as a company basically last year. And what we were kind of thinking about is we have a lot of different things as a company we want to do to really help support those three goals. But we wanted to start talking to people now. Like, we want to start like sharing content and information now. We want to start building a community now. So a couple things that I think I want to bring up that we're going to do this year, just to like help people understand what the scope of what we're trying to do. So the first thing obviously is this meetup group. We have lots, like I have so much content. I love building classes. I love building lectures. I love like just getting stuff that I'm excited about out to people. So, this meetup, this first one, is really about the SaHLA framework. And if you've ever been one of my students, you probably interfaced with it in some iteration, depending on how far we go back. You might understand this is like water and sand, or like read, write, speak, teach. But that has evolved into like this new thing. And the encapsulation of SaHLA is the focus tonight. But we're going to do technical topics as well too. Like next month, I'm going to try to convince you to consider Python as your second language, because it is so amazing. The one after that, I want to talk about system architecture, which is different than software architecture or different than application architecture, and why you should consider learning that. And I got like a whole list of things I want to cover: CI/CD. I got like all different stuff throughout the entire year. That's kind of like a grab bag of, here are the things that are going on in software development and web development that like is really hard to put together if you're just looking at the internet. Meaning, like, from my perspective, I see a lot of things I wish people knew, and the goal is to teach people, like, here's the full package of all of that. The second thing, so that's the meetups. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to do some pop-up meetups. We want to do things like networking events where we actually, even in a remote world, we'd love to like put people in the groups and like have guided conversation. And so I don't really know what that's going to look like yet, especially with Zoom, but we'd love the opportunity, especially because Rachel and I's reach is actually pretty national. And so we'd love to get you connected with the people from different parts of the country, which we think would be really great. And we want to like help facilitate the conversation, but largely we want you to meet people across the nation. So pop-up meetups for networking events. job seeker sessions, really talking about getting people, guest speakers in to kind of talk about like what they see from the hiring perspective. I can certainly talk about from my hiring perspective as well too, but really just talk about like kind of like a no bullshit kind of like feedback session of like, this is what's going on. This is what people are looking for. The next one is feedback sessions. So I might at some point solicit you to like, let me give you feedback on whatever code you're working on, your LinkedIn, whatever. And we'll just like go in and like tear it up and be like, this is why you're not getting a call back. Like, it's just like, once again, I personally don't need to operate under the filter of a school anymore. So I can be as direct as I possibly can be through Aftercamp. So that's part of the goal, is to just help you understand why someone's not calling you. Like, that's a big, and actually the gap is not as big as you think. Usually it's a pretty small gap, but I will solicit for that. And my hope is to get people, we can like actually like make that feedback session public, and we'll talk about it. So the pop-up meetups is another thing. Rachel and I are putting together a monthly newsletter as well too. So just once a month in your inbox is Rachel and Scott giving you advice. You can be excited about that. We are writing a couple ebooks too. There is a very, very expanded version of this talk that I'm currently writing right now. P.S. This talk exists in several different formats. So I've given these talks over the course of 4 hours of lecture. I've definitely written several tens of thousands of words on this topic. But I'm assembling it into a book finally. So hopefully that's something you'd be interested in reading. And then there's also the 4 things that Rachel and I often talk about. So that's the second ebook. And that will probably come out, I'm guessing, sometime this summer. And the 4 things you need to do to get a job would be learn things, build things, network, and apply for things. But there's strategies in each of those 4 things. And so we're looking at expediting and getting that out post-haste. So, and that's going to be written every year. So like, here's the 2021 guide to the 4 things you should be doing to get a job. Let's see. I'm also working on assignments. So like business grade assignments. So if like, there's always this question about, hey, you should build things. And you're like, what should I build? And like, I think a calculator is interesting. I think like a to-do app is interesting, but like the goal is to actually get you like business problems that you can solve that legitimately, if you brought it to a hiring manager, they'll be like, this is cool. So I'm working on those as well too. And finally, we are launching a Slack group tonight too. That way you guys can hop in Slack and talk to all of us. And we can kind of start to centralize people if they want to have expanded conversation. So Rachel will drop that Slack at the end of the night. I do have swag, by the way. If you have not gotten stickers and you want stickers, we got stickers and t-shirts, and we got all sorts of stuff coming out. So there's a form that I'll post in the Slack. Hey, look at that. Thomas has got this sticker there. It's cool. We've got new ones too. These are I actually really like these ones. So we'll post the link for free swag. One big ask I have kind of leaving tonight, if you like this session and you like what we're doing, Rachel and I would prefer not to be the best kept secret in the web world. So like, if you could just like tell people like, hey, you should go to this, it's free. Scott's kind of goofy, but like he's got good advice. That would be amazing. So with that, I understand that I don't know everybody here. There are a lot of people I do know. A lot of the group that's on here tonight has been through a program, either through GCU out in Phoenix or at Prime Academy, either the Kansas City or the Minneapolis program. So there's a lot of context and a lot of things that a lot of relationships I have built in this group already. But if we haven't met, let me just like take a quick minute to introduce myself. So my name is Scott Bromander. It's Czechoslovakian if you're wondering what the real last name comes from. You didn't know about that, did you, Shanice? I see your face. And I'm the director of engineering at a Kansas City agency. I've been in development and education for about 10 to 15 years. In my director of engineering role, I run a team of about 30 engineers, architects, and cloud engineers. We are growing crazy fast. Yes, I hire associate level developers. I hate the word junior. No, I'm not hiring right this second, but I will be very vocal when I do. So I will, like, the advice that I'm giving you through these sessions is like stuff I'm hoping to see. So I will definitely let everybody know when I am hiring, but not just right this second. I'm definitely a nerd for all things development. I'm on my 14th language, learning, just deepening my knowledge of Python right now. Python, all the things, machine learning, AI. So I'm a dork for all things development. I'm also a big nerd for psychology, sociology, and brain science, and that'll become very evident tonight. I'm going to talk a lot tonight about how learning highly technical topics relates to the brain. Specifically, the area of neuroscience that I love is the intersectionality between early to late LTP, which is the process of learning, and how emotion factors into that. So you'll hear a lot about how we feel affects how we learn, and that'll become part of the topic of conversation tonight. Behind the scenes, she's going to wave, I think Rachel. She's kind of the behind the scenes for Aftercamp right at the moment, but she brings a massive background in HR and tech to the conversation. And so you'll see her on LinkedIn a lot talking about D&I, talking about resumes and interviews, and just she is deep in that world. And so I can't say enough good things about her. We're married, obviously. Somebody made a comment on LinkedIn. They're like, hey, is she going to yell at you at this meetup? Because that was my favorite part of Prime. I'm like, I don't know, maybe, probably. But I guess kind of segueing into just the topic of tonight, I really felt strongly about when we started a meetup and kind of talking about our story and talking about, I'm Minnesotan, by the way, so when I say about, it sounds like a boot. I'm not Canadian. It's just the way I sound. Sorry. I had kind of like a traumatic entry into development. It was definitely Canadian adjacent. Yeah, no, it's further north than most Canadians who live in like Minneapolis is further north than Toronto. So I'm more Canadian than most Canadians. Anyways, traumatic entry into development for sure. Probably get into the why as I do more of these meetups, but I'll just kind of curtail the whole story by saying that I had to self-direct my way into learning development. And once I got into development, it was a very trial by fire kind of experience. Just had my kid. So brand new job, brand new career, brand new kid, brand new family. Imposter syndrome was a word that was being thrown around quite a bit at the time. I'm like, yep, that's definitely me. But I didn't realize that everybody kind of experienced this. And so as I got deeper into development, kind of a big commitment I made to myself was, if I can help other people not experience the same thing, that's what I want to do with my life. And so, but at the same time, I wanted to code because I love code. So there was this got to be this way to do both. And so I've been kind of ping-ponging back and forth between development and education development, that sort of thing for quite some time. And for the most part, it's been all about technology education. And as I got deeper and deeper into that, I definitely spent a lot of time reading about how people learn and how people feel, and really soliciting feedback and advice, hearing about other people's experience. And so I've spent a lot this past decade just listening to people talk about how they learn tech. And what I like what's going on the internet right now is that it's actually super common to talk about imposter syndrome. And I think that's a good place to start the conversation, but not everything is imposter syndrome. And that's a really kind of key piece to understand. I think, in some ways it's almost insulting too, because it's not every woman, for example, experiences imposter syndrome. And I feel like everyone women get lumped into that. That's not what's going on. And the brain is complex. And so as I've been giving these talks over the past 10 years, I've been trying to kind of find my flow and find what's the thing that helps people really understand what is going on. Because it turns out what's going on has a lot more to do with the way that your brain is wired than something that is wrong with you. And I think that immediately people think that when they're having a hard time learning development, that there's something wrong with them, that they're somehow an outlier. And it turns out that you're not. And so the thing I had to talk to you tonight about is called the SaHLA framework. And the SaHLA framework is kind of just a consolidation of all these books that I've read, these data I've collected, and interviews and countless interviews, and just talking to people. And so it's kind of the condensed version of everything I've read delivered to you in a way that basically just explains this is why you feel the way you feel when you're doing hard things technically, when you're learning hard, crazy technical things. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And just to kind of set this up a little bit in talking about why it's important, it is important to understand that like at every point in your life, you are like either growing or shrinking. And what I mean by that is like every activity you engage in, you are becoming better at that activity based off the way that the brain is wired. So this is like a sad example, but right now I am like hosting a meetup and we're talking about SaHLA, and I am scaling up in presentation, hopefully. I'm scaling up in my understanding and delivery of contents in the brain and my relationship with you. And I'm growing in that regard. My kiddo is sitting over at the kitchen table. I am not hanging out with him. And as sad as it sounds, I'm kind of shrinking in my relationship with him. Now I'm going to make up for it right after this, and we're going to go hang out the rest of the night and play video games. It's going to be awesome. But the point to this is that every time you engage in something, your brain is creating neuron connections in the brain, and you're establishing a deeper connection to that thing. So if you're watching like Game of Thrones, for example, you're getting more skilled at understanding the lore of Game of Thrones, while simultaneously you're shrinking in the other areas that you're not engaging in. So, if you're not studying programming, if you're not doing other activities, like you're becoming, less than in those areas. So don't worry, I'm not going to be here like you got to study every night. Oh my gosh, like just 2 hours every night, grind it out. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm about either. But it is important to understand that like you are growing and you are shrinking every minute of every day. The second core concept to this is that there is an element of intentionality and non-intentionality that factors into this. So I found the most horrifying thing on my phone, and it turns out that if you have an Apple, and I think Android has it too, you can actually see how much time you spend every day on your phone. It actually provides a weekly report letting you know that you spent X amount of time on your phone. I actually ran the report and I was like, okay, phone, tell me how much time I spend on my phone. And when I first opened it, or when I got the first weekly report, it said you spend on average 4 hours a day on your phone. And I'm like, holy shit. Like that was like crazy to me. And so I did some research, and it turns out that's actually like a American average for time spent on phone. And it got me thinking, and what I figured out was that like no one wakes up every single day and says, I'm going to spend 4 hours on the phone, right? Like nobody says I'm going to like surf Facebook or surf LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And so there's definitely this element of, did I intend to do that? And, when I talk to people about, people say to me all the time, like, where do you find the time to do this stuff? And I'm like, honestly, I can carve it out pretty much anywhere. I can watch a little bit less or get on my phone a little bit less. I just need to be intentional about it. I just need to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to spend 15 to 20 minutes a day learning something. And if you looked at my GitHub profile, you'll see that it's very evident on my GitHub profile. I'm very active on posting stuff that I'm learning. And so the whole point to this introduction area is that the goal for you, if you want to grow well, if you want to learn well, if you want to expand your career, is to intentionally think about growth, because it's happening whether you like it or not. You are growing in areas whether you like it or not. But the question is, are you growing in the areas that you want to be growing in? And that's not an attack. Like I'm not going to tell you to do things like don't watch TV or don't decompress, because those are important too. But it is this idea of, are you in the long run setting yourself up for success and being who you want to be? So the SaHLA framework breaks out like this. And here's what the SaHLA framework is. So it's SaHLA. So self-awareness is the first step. Second step is humility. Third step is logic. And the last step is action. And the way it's organized in that manner is it is a process. You do go through it, and it has everything to do with how the brain is structured. So quick neuroanatomy lesson. The brain basically developed in 3 phases. So we're just going to call this phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 is the lizard brain. So it's a collection of things like the amygdala, hippocampus, and so on. And that largely has a lot to do with the processes like emotion and coincidentally also processes learning. And it turns out that whenever we process the world, everything goes through that first structure first. And then as you move through the structures of the brain, you move up to the logical part, the prefrontal cortex and the things that are able to look at a situation logically versus emotionally. The point there is that everything we process emotionally before we process logically. And I promise I'll relate this back to tech because this is has a lot to do with what we're doing. So self-awareness is the first step of SaHLA. And in order to like get control of your thoughts and like make meaningful progress in learning something very complex like technology, you have to be aware of what's going on. And so I can't tell you how many times I've sat at my computer and I've been programming and something doesn't work and I freak the hell out. And it basically kind of becomes this thing where I start to have a mini panic attack and I just start throwing code at the screen until the thing works. There's actually, it is the amygdala that is actually processing that. It's basically the fight or flight, freeze or fawn area of the brain. And it basically is processing the world and saying, oh my gosh, you're under threat. And so when you're experiencing that, there's actually a term for it, and it's called amygdala hijacking. You can Google it, you can check it out. But basically, whenever you go down that death spiral of like thoughts of saying like, oh my gosh, things are not working, I'm freaking out. You start saying like, oh my gosh, if I don't get this code to work, then I'm such a failure. And you can kind of go through that whole language you use against yourself. That is literally just the part of your brain that is saying you are in trouble. And you know, back when that was the only part of the brain, like it kept us alive. But we're dealing with a world that is more complex. We are, you know, it's not. When we started developing the brain, we didn't like know that we were going to be programmers or solving complex problems. We were like literally like, let's just eat. If you don't eat, you're going to be in trouble. And so we're kind of left with this first structure of the brain that's processing the world emotionally. And so in the first step of SaHLA, when you think about intentional growth, when you're thinking about these moments where you need to like learn or figure something out or grow or whatever, it's understanding that no matter what you do, and there's nothing you can do about it, you're going to process situations emotionally first. And understanding that actually helps kind of move you through the process, because there's this concept of metacognition that basically says once we are aware of a feeling, we stop feeling it. So this is kind of why an author, C.S. Lewis, had basically said, once I recognize joy, I no longer am experiencing joy. Meaning that like once you recognize a happy moment, it becomes less happy. It becomes just like, oh, now you're thinking about being happy. And now you're not experiencing happiness, you're thinking about happiness. But the same is true from like when you're spiraling. You're like, oh my gosh, if you can get to a point where you're saying, oh, I'm spiraling, then you can start to kind of unspiral. You stop spiraling and you start like saying, oh, well, like I can kind of move on and say, why am I spiraling, right? This would be the kind of the next, like, why am I freaking out? And so what's important in self-awareness and kind of the first step of SaHLA, and you're dealing with these complex things, is just to realize that you have a series of inputs. Some are external, right? Like you have people around you that trigger you, or you have the outside world that's doing a really damn good job triggering emotional responses right now. And so you need to understand that like the outside world is contributing to how you feel. And then there's internal inputs too. And largely we've addressed one kind of pretty deeply, and that is the amygdala. And that's the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze system. And you kind of have to factor that into, you know, when you're trying to figure a problem out on your screen, or, and like, I don't have to ask this question and like ask for a poll because I know the answer, but like, you know, have you ever looked at your code and like started freaking out because you can't figure out what's going on? Like, I know the answer to that. And if you say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, you're lying. Coding can be hard. And what's interesting about this job as being a developer is that by trade, we are set up we are basically problem solvers, which implies two very important things. One, there's a problem, and two, that it needs to be solved. Because if we knew the answer, coding would be a lot easier. But like coding doesn't happen, or programming doesn't happen quickly, right? It happens because you figure one little problem out, then you figure the next little problem out, and then those two problems figured out cause problems with each other. And so then you got to stabilize the two systems. And then so you start kind of scaling these systems up and getting them to work together. And so all while you're doing that, it's like putting together a puzzle. If you knew how to put together the puzzle right away, puzzles would be really easy. But puzzles take time. Like you have to like find the corners and then build the edges and then work your way in. And the same is true for coding. And so the problem with it is that when we don't perform in coding, there's a lot of association to that, right? There's a lot of association to not being able to figure out the problem, and we relate that back to our livelihood and our income and being able to provide for our families. And so you start going down the spiral, right? Like, oh, if I can't figure this problem out, my job is going to be upset with me. And when my job is upset with me, I'm going to lose it. If I lose my job, I'm going to lose my money. If I lose my money, I'm not going to be able to support my family. They'll be disappointed with me. And, and what we're getting down to is the survival, right? We're getting down to like eating and sleeping and being sheltered, right? We're getting down to more of the primal kind of brain structure and saying, like, we got to figure that out. And so understanding that the way that your brain is wired is part of the problem is kind of key to SaHLA. And so if you're having a moment where you're feeling like you're in a panic, you're having an anxiety attack of like, why can't I figure this code out? Or you're learning something new and you're like, I don't understand what the author is doing. Understand that, just take a step back and say, why am I feeling this way? It's actually a sticky note that I keep on my computer too. Why am I feeling this way? And it's just a visual reminder of that you're capable of metacognition. You have these logical structures of the brain that are actually able to attack the amygdala and say, hey, bro, shut up. Just stop freaking out. And once you do that, we kind of move to the second part of SaHLA, and that is humility. And humility is interesting. And I don't like to talk about humility at face value. I like to talk about the anti-humility. And anti-humility is ego. And I would say, I feel like 99.9% of the world's problems could be fixed if humans didn't have ego. And this is going to go back to the same brain structures, right? The brain structures say survival, right? And lizard brain says, like, you got to survive. And what it does is it prioritizes its own survival over other survival. Like literally the way the brain is set up says, I need to strengthen my position and lessen your position. And so all sorts of problems happen when that happens. Now, internally, the biggest problem with ego, especially when it comes to programming, is that we have this tendency to compare quite a bit. Comparison is a huge mechanic within causing problems in programmers, right? We see other people program great things. And so we say, well, if I don't achieve that level, I am under threat. And I lots to say on that particular topic, but it's important to understand that, like, you will have your own success and others will own their own success. And so typically what we do when we look at good programmers, we take the best version of each programmer that we see and we create basically a composite person that is like a summation of all the best parts of everyone we see in programming. And the problem with that is that, like, literally no one has achieved that. So you're comparing yourself against something that you have not achieved, cannot achieve, and no one else has achieved. And the reality is that, like, comparison, in great quote out there, I'm sure you guys have seen it, comparison is the thief of joy, by Teddy Roosevelt. But it's all ego driven, and ego is the enemy. And, like, I think another kind of important thing to understand too is that, if you look at ego and humility as like two opposite sides, you're not really wholly one or the other. Like, you're not egotistical or humble. You're more like on a spectrum. And the reality of that is, like, given moment by moment, like, you might be humble about some things and egotistical about others. And so it's not like you can, like, achieve this, like, super humble state, or like nobody here is going to be, like, fully egotistical. But it's important to understand that, like, in order to progress and grow, you have to be in a humble state. And the reason that is because growth can't occur from an egotistical state. The reason that is because in order to achieve growth, you have to look at someone else's context. Example. So Jackson, our son is 9 years old, and he is in 3rd grade, and he's learning about fractions. And right now, he has a teacher who teaches him fractions. Now, if we yanked him out of the classroom and we said, okay, kiddo, you need to derive fractions from life experience. Like, we just know that wouldn't happen, right? Like no 9-year-old's going to derive fractions. He needs to be taught that. He needs to has that context shared with him. And so that growth is occurring because the teacher is sharing her context adjusted to teach Jackson, the 9-year-old, fractions. And that's a super simple example, but as adults, it's easy to forget that. It's easy to say, I don't want to do this thing I need to do to learn what I need to learn. And it's not as obvious when that happens. Like we don't say that out loud to ourselves, but it is kind of like, coming to a meetup or coming to read a book or saying that, hey, I'm gonna, instead of watching, I keep going back to Game of Thrones, nobody watches that anymore, but I'm gonna go learn instead of watching Game of Thrones, is that is a humble stance. The saying I'm gonna give up relaxation for self-improvement is a very humble stance. And so prioritizing growth becomes a humble act, because you're basically saying, my position is less than, the teacher's position is greater than, and I need to go learn from that particular person. And so when you're thinking about growth, like rapid growth, the best way to achieve that growth is so 2 examples. One would be in the moment panic, and the other one would be learning. And so in the moment panic is, hey, I'm freaking out that something's happening on the screen. And then the humble stance is, something's freaking out on the screen and I'm freaking out because I don't understand what went wrong, and being okay with that. Because if a lot of times when I go into these panic spirals with the code's not working, I don't want to admit to myself that I wasn't at a place where I could solve that problem. And I don't want to go through the steps that I know I need to go through to make that problem work. I want to just throw some quick code in. I want to, let's say, just do a quick Google search and just hopefully find the answer within 30 seconds, apply the fix, and have it good to go. That's ego, right? I want to put the least amount of effort into that and get the highest amount of return from that. Where the humble stance is more saying things like, I'm going to go really examine my code because I don't understand my code well enough, and I have to dig into it to really understand it. So humility kind of becomes this really central to what we need to do to kind of progress forward. And there's this thing in the brain, it's called early to late LTP consolidation, that kind of factors in this as well too. Basically what it has to do with the 2 centers of the brain, phase 1 and phase 3 of the brain. And that phase 1, that lizard brain, as it's taking in information, it actually stores it in a short-term memory essentially. And in order to get it to go into the long-term storage, we have the early LTP and late LTP. Basically those neuron connections need to form. So we need to continue to interface with things in order for those neuron connections to form. And that is a brain limitation. And the reason why this is important to say is because, and I said this in lectures all the time, just because I say something in lecture does not mean I think that you're going to know it walking away from the lecture. You're going to have to hear it several times in order for it to stick. And that is not me being anything other than just saying the way that your brain is wired basically says that you're not going to get this the first time through. So that's not my expectation as a teacher. But I also know that not every teacher has that expectation, right? There are some teachers who are what do you mean you don't understand? I have had bad teachers before that have said, I explained it, why don't you understand it? And I certainly have worked with senior developers who've made me feel that way as well too, of well, I sat down and explained it to you once, why don't you just instantly know it? And the reality of the situation is that the way the brain is wired is we have to continue to interface with it. And in order to get to that place where that's okay, you have to be humble about it. and like accept that as a limitation to yourself. You can't like get around that. So self-awareness, we're self-aware of the problem. We're humble enough to admit that we need to approach the solution. So then we move into logic. And logic's all about plan. This is where we get to the third phase of the brain and we say, okay, like how are we going to address this problem that we have in front of us? So there are kind of three core components to a plan. I look at this as like learning plans, or you can kind of think of it as like a plan of attack to solve an immediate problem, but I'm going to kind of talk about it more as like an intentional growth plan, because that would definitely be the thing I'd want you to take away. So 3 things you need to make sure that you are learning. The first is that you need to have structure, and this can be thought of as curriculum. You need to have like a book or a course or something, right? And I'm talking about efficiency here. I'm not talking about yes, I understand that other people you can learn a number of different ways. You can derive fractions as a 9-year-old. I understand that somebody can probably do it, but certainly not me. I would never learn fractions at 9 years old. It had not been taught to me. So it is a question of efficiency. And so finding some sort of course or book or something that's going to like teach you the thing that you need to learn. And the reason you're doing that is because it's just efficient too. Second thing you need is accountability. What's going to make you want to do it? I think is a really interesting question. It is kind of one of the things I think is broken about K-12 education, is that it's still very systematized. There's kind of like, we're used to like getting grades. And so like grades have always been kind of the accountability system. But as you graduate and become an adult, we don't get grades, right? We get different kinds of grades, we have different kinds of feedback systems. But at the end of the day, those feedback systems are not compelling enough, right? They're not as obvious, they're not as overt. So I'm all about accountability that like, to me, is very visual. So for example, Rachel and I work out every single morning, and we kind of give each other shit when we don't, right? If I don't hop on the treadmill, Rachel makes sure that I know about it. Like, right, if we don't wake up for a workout, Rachel definitely lets me know, and I'll kind of poke at her too a bit and be like, hey, are you gonna work out today? And she'd be like, yes. So accountability partners can be good. If you've ever been in one of my classrooms, you've heard me probably talk about the GitHub 30-day challenge as well too. If you go to my GitHub, it's github.com/Scott Reminder, you'll see lots of green. And the reason you're going to see lots of green is because every single day I make it a point to learn something new or work on something and then post it to GitHub. And the reason I posted to GitHub is because you get the little green box. That little green box has gotten me out of bed before, because I know if I don't make a commit, I don't get the green box. And it's great because yes, there is like 1,000 ways to game this. I totally get it. You can build a cron job. You can change the system clock. Yeah, I get that you can do all that. So if you're not gaming yourself, if you're just participating in it and saying, I'm only going to get a green box if I personally make a commit, that becomes an accountability mechanic. Like, right? Like you say, I'm going to go take a Team Treehouse course. I'm going to go take a Pluralsight video. I'm going to watch it, and then I'm going to like make a commit. And you make the commit, you get the green box. And that becomes kind of like this accountability system. So in order to have like an effective growth plan, you got to have an accountability system. It becomes really hard to like want to do things because you're not going to want to do it a lot, right? I think that like the thing I always say is that discipline carries the torch long after motivation gives way. And accountability can be a proxy for all of that. And what that means is that motivation can get you started on things, but that's going to give out. Like that's just is the way it is. And discipline can make up for a lot of things. And so if you have discipline, you're like, you know what, I don't want to work out, but I'm going to work out. That can get you pretty far too. But being accountable to something makes sure that that discipline system like continues to work. So structure, accountability. The third thing is community. And community is like everything. There's like this idea that kind of like throws me off a little bit. And I try not to be like too owly about it, but I see it all the time. I hate the phrase self-taught. Nothing against like people who have self-directed, but like self-taught implies that you have derived fractions at 9 years old on your own. It kind of, you like cheapen the authors or the course instructors that have taught you. And I know that's what you mean. Like I get that. So like, I'm not trying to be too owly, but it's going to go back to this efficiency thing. is that community makes us efficient. And so I remember like I'd finish up lectures at Prime or GCU, and I'd say things like, okay, well, if you understand that in 2 hours, congratulations, you learned in 2 hours what took me 2 years to understand. And so the whole idea is that people sharpen people. And so if you can find a community that like is focused on lifting you up and supporting you and answering your questions and really is like being kind of like your tribe, like that's a good community, right? That takes care of structure, that takes care of accountability, and community can really be a piece that ignites the growth, and that should be a part of your plan. So if you're sitting down kind of figuring out like, well, I want to learn something, I want to learn, I'm like really, really trying hard to like get people to do more Python. So I'm going to learn Python, and you should find a curriculum, you should find a structure, like find a book, find a course, find something that you click with. You should figure out a way to be accountable to doing it every single day. And to be really, really clear, I am not suggesting for a minute that you plan out 2 hours a day. That's not what I'm saying. But you should plan for like 15, 20 minutes. If you can get to that place, and it's really hard to get to that place where you want to do it, ask Rachel. I'm trying to get her to, I got her on the GitHub 30-day challenge, and she's gone over 30 days now. So she's doing good. But if you can get to a 10 to 20 minute a day, like that's awesome. And what's cool about that is that like at some point, like some nights you're going to be like, I'm going to put 2 hours in this, and you do. And then other nights you're going to be like, I don't want to do any of this. And you put in your 10 minutes and you get out. But the point of that is you created the space to actually do that. And then the third thing that's really important is that community, like figuring and planning that out. And we're really hoping that like that's what we want for Aftercamp, is we want to have a community of learners and a community of people to expedite you through this part of your life, right? To really just help with the like furious growth that we hope you to have. Dusty, I'm super curious what your cats are looking at, but they're the like only thing in frame right now for me. Okay, so going through those brain structures, we've gone through the self-awareness piece. We're aware of what we're feeling, and we'll get to the humility piece, and we say, okay, like I'm in this situation, I need to learn this thing, or I'm freaking out. What's the plan? How am I going to attack this problem? Or how am I going to go after learning this thing that's actually going to make this stuff stick? The fourth step in SaHLA is actually kind of a seemingly very simple one, but I run into a lot of people who are very aware of their situation. They're humble about it. They're like, yep, nope, I totally need to like lose weight, or I totally need to learn this thing. They got a plan put together, and then they don't do the last step, and that's just take action. Amazon's leadership philosophies, one of the ones that I just love is have a bias for action. And I think you can plan things to death, and that has 100% to do with the survival mechanisms in your brain. You're trying to plan out the perfect scenario because you are afraid of failure. And so you fail to act. And taking that step and saying, I've got the plan, I'm ready to go, just go. In fact, one of my guys at work, he is an architect, and he put together this really cool plan together to help scale up and bring our associate level developers to mid, and our mid developers to seniors. And it was like this like really thick document. He's like, all right, man, I'm ready for you to give feedback. I'm like, nope, activate, go. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I want you to do it. And he's like, don't you want to give feedback? I'm like, I do, and I will, but we're gonna get the best feedback from trying it first. And we talked through what he was afraid of, and I was like, no, man, like action and doing stuff is always going to be a better default than trying to plan your way through it. If you got an iteration, and if you ever read about the lean startup, which is a project management methodology, they talk about this quite a bit, is it's better to work with what you have and get an iterate. Like if it can work, do it, like just go for it. But what does that look like in practice? I think is a really how do we apply this like learning well? And so there are kind of 4 core steps to action as it relates to like learning new things, learning technical things specifically. And that's another acronym, or another kind of a system here I have here. And that is the read, write, speak, teach process. And so just what this is it basically describes your proficiency levels in a particular topic. So the first one is the read step. And that is where you are, you're kind of having a passive experience and you are building out the tools for your tool belt, so to speak. So you're learning that a hammer hammers nails and a saw cuts wood, and you're putting that into your tool belt. Or in programming terms, that's learning about what a for loop does, learning how an array works, learning how functions work. Those are tools you now have in your tool belt. Where the right step is all about making decisions with those tools. And this is where I think academia gets it really wrong. In programming, what that means is go build something with those tools. Or in kind of our tools metaphor here, it's not understanding and being assessed on how a saw works or how a hammer works. It's saying go build a birdhouse. So go make decisions with how those tools work to actually make something. And I find a lot of people's failure to act happens right here, especially when it comes to programming, is they'll learn about something, they'll follow the tutorial, but they didn't engage in the decision-making process. And the question becomes why? Why didn't they? Well, because that step from read to write proficiency in making decisions is the first step where we start to experience failure. And we resist it like crazy because we know once we move outside the walled garden of the tutorial and we move into making decisions, we're going to get stuff wrong. But when we think about that early to late LTP, long-term consolidation and long-term learning, that's where all the neuron connections are made, is deciding how and when to pull out those tools and actually use them. The next step in the read, write, speak, teach is speak. And this is the externalization of things you understand. Actually, it's really funny to talk about code because code is a very personal experience, right? We do it ourselves. And yes, in some cases, I get there's extreme programming and pair programming and all those things. But for the most part, we think about code on our own. And what's cool about the brain, what a lot of people don't realize is that our brain is actually very capable of thinking about multiple things at once. So just a quick example of that. Subconscious is a crazy thing. You can totally get up from your desk and walk away from your computer and the problem that you're trying to solve. And your subconscious will actually work on that problem for you. Yes, you're not thinking about it. That's the point. This is why when you're showering or you're laying in bed and you're have this epiphany. And that is because the way that the brain is designed is the subconscious will work on these things. And then when it figures it out, it'll serve it back up to the prefrontal cortex and be like, epiphany. And so it is possible for the brain to kind of multiply process things. Now, the funny thing about speak is that in order to get all of those thoughts out and talk about them, it's you trying to think about something that you're thinking about multiple different ways and kind of externalizing it in time. Which is actually kind of a hard thing to do, especially new topics. So what's nice about these steps is that every time you step up in proficiency, you start to expose what you didn't know in the previous step. So when you go to build the birdhouse, you're like, oh, maybe I didn't understand nails that well, or I didn't understand glue. Or when you try to go solve an application or build an application, you're like, I'm not thinking about this the right way, or I didn't expect to get that error. So then you go back and figure out what you didn't understand in the read step. And the same is true for the speak step. And this is a well-documented thing in programming. You guys have heard of the rubber ducking thing, right? Where you keep a rubber duck on your desk and you talk to it, you try to talk through your code. That is actually you engaging in the speak step, and it's exposing what you missed in the build or the write and the read step. But the trick with speak is that it is from your context. You are doing it, externalizing it from just the way that you understand it. And this is different than the teach step, which is the final step in read, write, speak, teach. And that is the externalization adjusted for your audience. And this is where I think a lot of teachers get it wrong. And this is a really important kind of thing to talk about, because as you engage in learning and growth, you have to understand that not every piece of content is made for you in your context. And that's kind of why I get so caught up in K-12, why it's a problem, is because we are taught at an early age that the content we are going to should be catered for us, and it's not. It also might explain why your senior developer is not a good teacher, right? is because they're speaking, they're not teaching. And that's a whole other kind of thing that like you need to be aware of, that sometimes you're going to come across people who are like in position to support you, and there's a limitation that they have. They can't adjust the context to your understanding. And I always can tell when somebody is speaking versus teaching because they don't ask enough questions, right? If you've been at Prime, it's like, and I answer a question, it's about how well did you come and ask it to me? In fact, one of the other instructors that a lot of you know, his name is Myron. He was awesome at this. Like he would just like, somebody would roll up and have a question. And he would just like have a bit, like just respond with a bunch of questions because he wanted to make sure you understood the problem. He's also getting you to speak it. And so a lot of times as their student is speaking the code, they actually figure out what the problem is. And so that's read, write, speak, teach. So the whole point to this, if you like kind of look at SaHLA in a macro view, it's really about just when you're experiencing a problem and you're experiencing kind of like this mini panic attack, it's about stepping out of yourself for a second, being self-aware and saying, hey, I'm having a panic attack about my code. Well, addressing it humbly and saying, well, of course I have a problem with my code. I don't understand what's going on with it, and I need to figure it out. Then you enter the logic problem. How are you going to solve that problem? How are you going to address that particular error that you're running into? And then just taking action. And what's cool is that you can like go through SaHLA at a macro level saying like, I want to learn Python, which by the way is our next session. You should totally come. Or you can have like mini SaHLAs, right? Where you're like having these like individual little like growth attacks where you're like paused and stalled out and you can't figure it out. And the trick to this is once you get into SaHLA, it's pretty easy. It's getting to that self-awareness piece. And I think that's the hardest part, is just being aware of what's happening. And so getting to that point where you can say, gosh, I'm having a problem and I need to address it. Once you can get to that point, you can move through it pretty quickly. And so if you take away nothing else from this talk, what I would say is just like really focus in and like leave yourself a sticky note and just say like, what am I feeling? Because that's like a super important question. And once you can get a handle of that, like you can go through and you can grow as much as you want. But going back to the very beginning of this talk is you have to be very intentional about it, because the way that the brain is wired, it's not going to just do it for you. The way that the brain is wired is that it's wired to keep you alive. It's not wired to keep you grow. And growth is a threat. Growth is new. It's expanded context. It's not something the brain is super comfortable with. So that is SaHLA. That kind of wraps up the chat, but I'll be happy to love to answer questions and hang out for a little bit and just see what you guys got. I can't hear you, Josh. Hang on a second.
Audiobook or something that kind of talks about something similar to the SaHLA.
Yeah. Okay, that's great, because I actually had this set aside and you remind me to talk about it. I'd love to like leave you all with like one thing you should do in between meetup sessions. And so, but between now and the next meetup, if you guys come back, I would love if you read 1 or 2 books. The first book is Atomic Habits. The second book is called Brain Rules. And I'll post this in the Slack if you guys join. The way I like to think about this is that this is the framework. This is how to use the framework. And so this Brain Rules is how the brain is wired. This just talks about like how to build good habits and like how to like effectively use the brain. So if you read one of those 2 books, I think I've read a ton, and these are 2 of my favorite current adaptations. One's the neuroscience-y stuff, and the one is more the application of neuroscience to kind of like own your day, own your growth. And I got a bajillion more recommendations if you've read those 2, but those 2 are kind of my go-tos. Cool. Other questions?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Well, the like sort of tutorial hell where you're intaking information and you're putting off making decisions. You know, you're reading about the latest technologies. You want to learn them. You want to be good at them. But sometimes you don't have the basic building blocks to really make it work. Like, I remember you talking about buying some of the packed courses and just coding along with them. What are some of the ways that you can push yourself from the read to the write?
I think, just the topic abstractions, right? So over the weekend, I took this course on SQL, Alchemy, and Flask. And the course, what it was like it was building out a book library, right? Like it's just a CLI command line interface application. And like just the simple, like, okay, I'm going to go through this again. I'm going to build it for me. I'm not going to follow the tutorial, but I'm going to build the exact same application, but this time I'm going to build it for movies, right? It's such a small change, like, right? Like categorically, they're almost identical. Like just like they all have a title, a director, and a run line, whatever, but removing the tutorial itself and kind of setting it to the side and saying, all right, I'm going to try to recreate the same thing without having like the tutorial in front of me. But it's there to back you up if you need it, right? But like rebuilding an abstract of it without having the safety net, so to speak, is a really good first step. And then the other thing I would say too is asking the question, what did I learn last week that I could bring together with this, right? So this is a CLI tool that I made with SQL Alchemy, but I also learned Flask, which is a web framework. I was working on kind of deepening my Flask knowledge and authentication authorization. So the next thing I could logically build would be, oh, I should build a book application you can log into as a web app and log books to that, right? So it's really just thinking about abstractions. And what I'll say is if you ever need ideas, just let me know. And I think that sometimes it's harder for us in the moment to kind of come up with our own ideas because it's like you have to like position yourself to do that, and like that's a fear-based like positioning, and your brain doesn't want to do that automatically. So I'll come up with ideas for you, Macy. Shanice will come up with ideas for you.
I have a question about kind of like who Aftercamp is for. So I've got some interns right now who have not been to a boot camp, but I think that they would really benefit from this type of content. And I guess I'm just curious, like, as you guys are kicking off and thinking about who's the audience, whether you'd say to recommend Aftercamp for people who've been self-directed up to this point.
Yeah. One of the things I'm going to define pretty early here on the next month or so is kind of creating this baseline point that says Aftercamp assumes this knowledge. And every piece of content we create is based off that assumption that you know this thing. And if you don't, here's a bunch of places you can go learn it. And for the most part, what it's going to be is we're going to really enter at that RESTful CRUD standpoint where you can like build a very, very basic REST API and save into some database. And we're not going to make any assumptions on database because our goal is not a continuation of Prime or GCU. It's a continuation of the standard across all boot camps. And so really our target, if you're like looking at it, there's a group called Trilogy Education and then Launch Code here locally as well too. And they kind of end at that point where they actually haven't taught like a front-end framework. And so whenever I teach something, like when I talk about Python next month, it's going to really be, hey, I'm assuming you build a basic Express server. So let me show you how to build a very similar Express server in Flask, and like, let's talk about Python, the differences, and really keep it at that level. So everything we do at Aftercamp is going to have that entry point and build off of that. And otherwise, it's not going to make any other assumptions.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Cool. Well, thank you guys for coming tonight. Like this has been cool. This is like way. As I told Rachel, I was like, if we get 2 people, I'll be pretty stoked. So the fact that like 30 people are on here, I really appreciate it. We're gonna post the recording of this too. Once again, come join us on Slack. We'll send you free stuff too. We got small swag right now, but our swag is planning on getting bigger. So more on that later. But thank you all so much for coming, and I'll hopefully see you guys next month. I'm gonna stop the recording, but I'll continue to hang out if you guys want to just like shoot the shit. So thanks everyone.
Thank you both.
I wanted to just ask, in case I can't find it when I search, on Twitter, do you have a Twitter handle?
We do. Rachel is so funny. She's like, hey, we gotta get Twitter going. I'm like, I got it. I just haven't done anything with it yet. Hang on a second.
Oh.
I
just thought I could put something on there saying, hey, I attended this great
Yeah, no, that's
Meetup.
that's a super great point too. Rachel, I forgot to ask it. I'm sorry, but if you guys want to, the people who are here, if you drop me a message, we're gonna do a post on LinkedIn, and we will tag you, and like that'll get us into your network, and hopefully we can just like all share networks and stuff like that. So I will, Andrea, I will find our Twitter. I know it's out there. We have all the social media accounts somewhere. Just have not touched it yet because we really haven't done anything up until tonight. So we will hook it up.
No problem.
Did we message you on LinkedIn or?
Yeah, LinkedIn or join the Slack. Come hang out.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that was okay because I already messaged you on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a LinkedIn troll. I don't know. I just like it. We've gotten some really cool relationships. You know, Rachel and I reach out to people quite a bit, and so just by putting yourself out there, I've gotten to connect with like NASA and Pokemon, and I don't know where else have we talked to you, Rach? I'm sorry. You should just go over here. We're amateurs apparently. Amazon. Can you hear that? Yep. All right, cool. I wasn't sure if I was on mute or not.
Yeah. Now you get to feel what Brad and Sarah had to deal with.
Yeah. Oh no, I was still around for like at least I feel like I was up there I was with you guys for like 6 weeks during tier 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think you were there pretty much even in our like group project. Pretty wild.
Scott may or may not have jumped in on a debug session one late evening.
Yeah.
I don't think I can help you, but I'm gonna try. But disclaimer: I've had a couple glasses of wine. So.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
That sounds like me. Yeah, no.
That was incredible.
Nothing's changed. Well, cool, everyone. If you haven't connected with me on LinkedIn, I think most of you have, but feel free to. I'd love to just continue to chat and be connected. All right.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, everyone.